Good afternoon. My name
Hi-
is Katie Delmay, and I'm a senior curator here at the Frist Art Museum. Thank you all for joining us today. Apologies for running a minute late, but had some technical issues. For those who wish, I want you to know that closed captioning is available for this program. You can turn live captioning on or off by using the controls on the bottom of your screen. I also want to note that this program will include images of nudity and may have some discussion of heavy subjects such as sexual trauma and suicide. As is our custom at the Frist, I'd like to begin by offering a land acknowledgement. The Frist Art Museum sits on land that Cherokee and Shawnee Native peoples, elders, and their ancestors call their homeland. We acknowledge and pay respect to them and offer deep gratitude and respect to the land and water that support us. As you likely know, today's conversation with Karen Elson and Libby Callaway is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Lee Alexander McQueen and Henri Rendezvous, which, believe it or not, is on view only for 2 more days. It closes on Sunday. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, please hurry out and do so. Organized by Barrett Barrera Projects in St. Louis, at its heart, Rendezvous is a collection of garments and photographs that explore the close friendship and trust between the late British fashion designer Alexander McQueen and French artist Henri. Today, we are very grateful to have Nashville-based creative consultant Libby Callaway and Nashville and New York-based supermodel Karen Elson here to speak about Karen's long history with McQueen and the symbiotic creative relationship that exists between model and designer. Libby is going to officially introduce Karen, but I'd like to say a few words about her, about Libby. Libby Callaway moved to Nashville in 2004 from New York City. She returned here to Tennessee, I should say, which is where she was born and raised. In New York, her career in fashion media really began. As a newspaper journalist, she has contributed to some of the country's most widely regarded magazines and newspapers, including the New York Post, where she was a staff writer and fashion editor. As a PR and marketing professional, Libby has worked in-house for the Nashville Denim Company, Imogene and Willie, and the Alabama fashion house, Billy Reed. In 2016, she founded the Callaway, a premier white glove communications company working primarily with fashion, retail, beauty, design, and hospitality companies in Nashville, the South, and beyond. Nashville is very lucky to have Libby here in town, and the Frist is very lucky to have her as a close friend. So thank you, Libby, for all you do. One more matter of business before we turn things over. I would like to thank our supporters of Rendezvous. Our platinum sponsor is HCA Healthcare TriStar Health. Our education and community engagement supporter is Wingate Foundation. The lead sponsor is Blevins Inc. Our hospitality sponsors are the Union Station Nashville Yards and Grand Hyatt Nashville. And our Spanish translation sponsor is the Center for Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies at Vanderbilt University. And as always, we are grateful for the ongoing support for operating from the Frist Foundation, Metro Arts, Tennessee Arts Commission, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Please join me in welcoming to the Zoom stage Karen Elson and Libby Callaway.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much, Katie. Before I introduce Karen, I want to let everybody know that we are going to have a small Q&A session at the very end. So if you would like to submit questions, do so in the Q&A portion at the bottom of this feed. And also, in case you want to see the entirety of the two fashion shows that we go into, Voss and Deliverance, we're going to put those YouTube links in so you can see the whole shows. I wanted to put that up top before we start. But now let me embarrass Karen for a minute. My guest, Karen Elson, is a creative multi-hyphenate, a songwriter with 3 albums under her belt, an autobiographer, author of The Red Flame, which was published by Rizzoli in 2020. And this is the wild card, she is a former boutique owner of the gone but not forgotten Nashville vintage store, Venus and Mars. She is also a devoted mother, wife, and friend, but most people know her as a supermodel. For almost 3 decades, Karen has walked runways for elite fashion houses, including Chanel, Gucci, Valentino, Dries Van Noten. She's been the face of numerous fashion campaigns, including Yves Saint Laurent, Tom Ford, Christian Dior, and at the age of 18, Versace, for which she was photographed by the legendary photographer, Richard Avedon. The Versace job came on the heels of her big break. In 1997, Karen's rising star was given a major goose by photographer Steven Meisel, who convinced her to shave her eyebrows, cut her hair into a choppy bob, and sit for what became the cover of Italian Vogue. Sorry, we're losing a photo here. Yes, there we are. Sorry, Karen.
There I am. Don't worry.
We had to show that one. It's like critical to this whole thing. Over her career, Karen has graced the covers of countless magazines. Last year, she hit the incredible milestone of having been featured on 50 Vogue covers internationally. This includes her beloved friend, the fashion editor Edward NFL's final British Vogue cover, also shot by Meisel, where Karen was featured alongside no less than Oprah, Linda Evangelista, Kate Moss, and numerous other icons of fashion and entertainment. Since 2006, she's been living in Nashville. And in my book, Karen Moving to Town marked the beginning of our city's modern fashion awakening. Her mere presence here changed people's perception of what Nashville is in terms of fashion and what it could be. Thanks to Karen, high fashion and Nashville are no longer oxymorons. For today's conversation, we're going to talk about her late friend, the fashion designer Alexander McQueen, who his friends called Lee. So Karen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you, Libby. Seriously, and everybody at the Frist. It's a real honor.
It's also nice to have you back. This is the 3rd program we've done for the Frist over the last 15 years.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I'm always happy to be a part of these things.
So kind. Thank you. And I just think it's a testament to your success and your longevity that we can continue to have these conversations and never talk about the same thing twice.
Yeah, I'm happy about that, right?
Yeah, exactly. You've lived a lot.
Yes.
So let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the mid-90s. When did you and Lee McQueen meet for the first time?
So we met in the sort of mid to late 90s. I want to say 97, perhaps, during my very first London Fashion Week when I was 17, I believe. And I walked in his runway show. And back then, the Alexander McQueen fashion show during London Fashion Week was one of the, if not the most exciting fashion show to walk in. I feel like Lee was at his sort of beginning to get to his pinnacle. It was right around when he had joined Givenchy. He was sort of the enfant terrible of it's like the naughty child of the fashion industry and the sort of the real left of center creative. And I walked in his fashion show and it was just, I remember I had sort of they put red contact lenses in me. It was if anyone can remember, it was sort of the era of the sort of jean, the bumster jean where half your bum was hanging out. And sort of, it was interesting to see sort of his earlier creations becoming sort of a staple, a thread that I would see throughout his career. He was still very unpolished. I mean, as I would say, Lee was throughout the entirety of his career, is quite an unpolished person in the most beautiful of ways, but he really was then. But his show was the coolest show to be a part of and the most creative. And I just remember when I personally met him, he was unlike a lot of other designers I've met. There was something, a lot of people I gravitate towards in fashion. It's funny that you mentioned Edward Enninful, because Lee, Edward, and I would say myself, we were all from the wrong side of the tracks. We weren't from sort of highfalutin families. We didn't have a quote unquote pedigree. we were from working class families, and we were the anomalies within our families. We were all the sort of the odd one out, the black sheep, the one who was creative and sort of went off and did a completely different career path. And it was very obvious when I met Lee that that was who he was. He was the, you know, a sort of cheeky, mischievous East London boy, who could have had a life of crime like myself,
Right.
but we chose a life of fashion instead.
I love it. Excuse me for one, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. I have some photos of these early shows, but my clicker is not working. Oh, good. Now we're working.
Mhm.
So I had some early pictures of Karen, and
That is him and I in New York, actually. I remember those.
that was at the opening of the store on West 14th.
Yeah, exactly on West 14th.
Yeah.
I remember that moment. I mean, you know, I won't get
yeah.
into detail about the sort of conversation, but me and Lee that night had, you know, it was a moment where he was really struggling during that moment in time. Like that moment, him and I were having actually a very deep, intense conversation about my struggles, his struggles
Wow.
within the fashion industry, and sort of feeling like we didn't fit in. And, you know, Lee had, you know, I think it's pretty fair to say he had his demons, and he was actively sort of trying to work through them. But I remember that evening specifically because I just done an article in British Vogue about body image and about how my body image was constantly dissected. And he came up to me and was like, I'm so relieved you talked about that, because I struggle with my body image. Because Lee, you know, he would sort of, his weight would fluctuate. It's hard being in fashion. It's hard. It's a business of beauty. And, you know, even though Lee's version and perception of beauty was very different to other people's, you still are vulnerable and succumb to sort of the pressure and feeling like you need to, well, Lee wasn't someone who wanted to fit in. He still had his self-esteem issues. And we just really, him and I bonded again on being very different, even in the fashion industry as well.
Right. I think I told you this when we talked the other day, but like in the Frist exhibit that's up right now through Sunday, guys, so go if you haven't. There's this quote that was heartbreaking, but it really speaks to what you said. He says, "Can you imagine living with my face in that land of beauty?"
Oh, you know, and the irony is that, you know, in my mind, he was one of the most beautiful people I've ever met, you know. But again, it just goes to show, I think, with a lot of deeply creative individuals, it always comes with a struggle, you know. It does. I love the pictures you're showing right now because there's such core memories for me, that particularly. But him and I, you know, he had a lot of really incredible women around him, Lee. He gravitated towards really strong, interesting, and complicated women. But again, the basis of him and I's sort of bond really was that we were from sort of we were the unlikely people to succeed.
I love that so much. And there's a quote that you gave, like I went back and listened to the interview you did with Nick Knight on his show Studio. You talked about McQueen a good bit. And there's the most amazing quote. You say, "My secret weapon is that I can become many people and then vanish."
Yeah.
And to me, this is your superpower for sure. It's like, because I've always told you should be an actress too. You should sideline.
You know what? I know so many actors, and I love
know,
them all
I
so much.
know.
I have my hands full with fashion.
I know you do, babe. But like it is you, but you just become these characters. And like I think that makes you guys such amazing partners in like what you created together. So I did get I went back and pulled, I've looked at every Vogue.com Givenchy and McQueen show out there. And so I pulled some images of you on the runway. So this is the first one.
Yeah, that is the very first one in 1997. It was my first London Fashion Week. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to look at and witness. Like that was the very early days of my career, and especially, you know, that one right there. I mean, I remember that. I remember the agony of putting those red, or I think it was black or red contact lenses in, and sort of the torture. I couldn't see, and I'm already blind as bad as it is. Like I could barely see on a good day. So put, you know, those sort of dark contact lenses in me, and I was done for. But again, that was the power of him and his runway shows. They were never, McQueen's runway shows were not the typical runway show. There was no pageantry about it. There was no you know, a lot of runway shows, it's really just to show the clothes.
Yeah.
Lee set the tone. He did a performance. It was performance art. It was he cracked his head open and let us have a glimpse inside of what was going on in there. He thought about every single detail. It was like he was a movie director of clothing. That's how I view him. He's a painter, but his medium is clothing. Like he really, he thought about every single detail, and every single detail mattered, from the hair, the makeup, to the set design, obviously the clothing, to the music. I mean, he really did curate all these things.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. What is the most, we're going to talk about Voss and Deliverance, which I consider the pièce de la résistance of like his work and your work with him. But like in terms of other shows, what are some of your most memorable experiences walking
Well,
for
there
him?
was one show we did, and you've got it in the pictures. It's the one show, I remember I had this red wig on, and it was very kind of 1950s cheeky.
Oh yeah,
Like Girl at the Fish. This one, The Man Who Knew Too Much, very Hitchcock in a way. But I remember that show clearly because it was one of his more playful ones. And you know, there was always sort of a darker color to his fashion shows, and this one was like more of a contrast to that. And I think it was more a reflection on the women he grew up with, and the reflection of beauty, and the reflection of sort of the characters. Like you see one, I mean, I'm like smoking a cigarette, walking down the runway, and I've got this sort of 50s hair and the cinched waist. But he really, that show for me, obviously so many shows stand out, but what makes that one a little bit more different is because he was kind of more playful, and it was less darker, and had more of a reflection, like I said, of, I think it was the women that he maybe fell in love with when he was growing up. The women who inspired him to make clothes in the first place were those sorts of women.
Oh, that's so great. It's, you know, compared to the other ones, it's such a conventional runway look. I know you guys are on a big expanse and not necessarily in a traditional runway, but just the straightforwardness of the shots, even like going through all of these shows, it's sometimes really hard. Like I sent you these images ahead of time because I'm like, make sure that they're you, because his makeup and his hairstyling were so important to the whole story.
It was characters. I mean, we really had, we were characters, and he wanted characters in his runway shows, and they were really deeply thought about. I mean, and you know, it's so funny. I remember this show particularly, I just remember him backstage. I remember, like, I have such a vivid memory of him sort of cackling backstage, laughing. And usually when you were backstage with Lee shows, there's chaos, and he's yelling, and he's like, you know, yelling not at anybody in particular, but just sort of the frenzy of it all. He really was a beautiful creator, and had so much sort of, it was like joy, pain, fury sometimes. It was all contained in every single show.
Wow. What were your first impressions when you first met him? Like, what were the things that came? Had you heard about him before, or like, was it?
Heard about him before. I mean, he was the, like, you know,
he was the guy.
I'm the most famous fashion designer in the UK. But what I remember about him, he was so unpretentious. I mean, Lee throughout his life was the most unpretentious person I've ever met. He did not play the fashion game at all. He did not like those who played the fashion game. And, you know, I even think about that with his relationship with Isabella Blow as well, because in contrast, Isabella Blow was from, you know, she was a great English aristocrat, and a great, almost like a, you know, she was this equally otherworldly character. But again, they bonded on sort of their suffering. I think they bonded on being the outsiders and not being sort of mainstream in any sense. But you know, he brought out the human in people. He really did. He really found a way of not, he didn't take anybody's nonsense. You know, we would just tell you, shoot you straight. I remember one time bumping into him, and I was pregnant with Scarlett, actually. it's like 2005 perhaps, or 2006. And I remember, because I just moved to Nashville and we bumped into each other in London, and he's like, you know, in his Cockney accent, like, be careful, you're losing your Northern English accent. Like, you know, and it was really cute, and it was really, he was really the most down-to-earth person, and not in any sort of fake way. He, again, the least pretentious person. He hated playing the fashion game.
Yeah.
Hated sort of elitism in general. He really was not about, you know, I remember sort of multiple times, I told you the story the other day when we were chatting. There was an event that me and Lee went to this. It was like a Hillary Clinton got an award while she was the first lady. And I remember Gwyneth Paltrow was giving Hillary Clinton the award, and we were sat at this table with Elton John and all these very sort of highfalutin people. And Lee the entire time was, oh, bloody hell, I can't wait to leave. This is not for me. This place is not for me. And he got Elton John's bodyguard to go and get us a bottle of vodka, because he was like, I don't drink wine. I don't drink that fancy stuff. And got us a bottle of vodka, which Lee and I just kind of, you know, wigged secretly. And I was in this gorgeous Givenchy couture dress that I still have, that my daughter now wears, which is wonderful.
Oh, nice.
And we did this, but it was sort of like everything was with him was like a Cinderella moment, where, you know, like it was almost like the joke was on everyone else, like, oh my God, how are we in these rooms? They don't know that we're both really don't belong here, but here we are, and we're faking it. And we left that event and then went off to sort of all the sort of down and dingy nightclubs, dancing in this couture dress all night long, and ended up back in his fancy hotel room late at night. And, you know, I remember there was just a moment where he was talking about the pressures of all of this, and he got quite emotional, because I think his onus of all of what he was doing, he was just an artist, and sort of the artifice of the performance of fashion, you know, the being the face of your brand, being the sort of caricature, was really, really difficult for him. And I often reflect on how, if Lee was still here today, how he would fare in this current climate with Instagram, TikTok, content, the era of creative director, not designer, the era of brands having, you know, it's like you've got the brand name, and then you've got the creative director of the brand. I suspect, and it's, again, how could anybody know? But I suspect that he may have left the business by now, because he just would not be a part of what the fashion climate looks today.
You would hope he'd be directing movies, like kind of doing a Tom Ford situation,
or maybe,
you know?
I don't know. I
maybe.
I think he definitely would be doing something ultra creative, but on his own terms. I really believe he would not abide by the climate that we're in and what the prerequisites are for designers. It just wasn't his reason for being a designer. You have to remember, like, he was trained on Savile Row. I mean, the most elegant, you know, it's like men's suiting. Like, he learned how, he was a proper tailor at first. He knew how to truly make clothes. He was a perfectionist in that realm, and he was an artist as well. But he was not a
dilettante. It was, It's like he wouldn't be satisfied just being a creative director and having people do the work for him.
He wouldn't be satisfied bossing people around, telling them to do it. He was tactile. He was there with the scissors himself. He was there stitching things up. He was a hard worker. Because he was from a hardworking family, and he was a dressmaker. That's how I view him. He was a dressmaker. He wasn't he wasn't anything more.
Right. So you can see some of the tailoring in the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which is a mouthful. And you're lucky you got to wear the Ace Frehley makeup.
I mean, come on, look how beautiful that is, right?
It's like, so cool. And we talked about this the other day, that I actually was at that show, and when you walked in, it was at the Conciergerie where Marie Antoinette was held before she was executed, and like in the prison walls behind bars, there were albino wolves that you could smell.
I remember that.
Right?
Yeah,
and that's something that you all walked like along the arches. It was beautiful. But it just, the mise-en-scene, like his whole where he put the shows and how he told the stories. And I know he collaborated with Tim Burton on that one too. It was so epic. Like everything was epic. And like I don't think that, I know Chanel, that I mean, like, are there other people who does shows as big as he did them?
Well,
It's like,
I'd say it was the, Galliano for sure.
yes.
Karl Lagerfeld with Chanel, absolutely.
Chanel.
Let's say they're the only two people that I could, if you're comparing, and it's hard to compare because all three are completely unique and original and brilliant in their own right. But
Exactly.
the only place I could put Lee is in that same box of sort of creative genius, of like worlds that are creative and created, and the sort of encyclopedic knowledge that all three of them had or have. And it's sort of this endless well of brilliance, and but he really was in his own league, in his own box, in his own lane, and was truly, a once in a lifetime kind of artist.
What did you guys talk about, like as friends? Did you talk about art? Did you go see, like, was it?
It's funny because again, he was such a little rogue, and he was such a little naughty boy that we really talked about, like, yes, obviously there was stuff we talked about that was creative and artistic, but he was so, I can't stress enough how unpretentious he was. He didn't, if you were trying to impress him with your intelligence, he'd probably tell you to F off, that did not excite him. Real life excited him. Like walking in Soho in London excited him. Punks excited him. Probably things I shouldn't talk about excited him. Like he had, lovers and this thing and that thing going on, and that, like, the sort of the more carnal aspects of life excited him. And I think he was also, very much sort of exploring his world as a gay man as well. And the sort of scene in London, which I think for a lot of people compared to maybe in America was much more liberal and open and far more real. But also with that probably came, other things that came along with it as well. And I think that he was a very real person. I mean, he surrounded himself with really interesting people. And I would say, he was real, and he was tender, and he was volatile. Like everything Lee felt was on the surface. If he liked you, he loved you. If he didn't like you, he'd be like, oh, fuck. And if he wasn't, he was just truly genuine, and I miss that the most.
There is
so backstabbers. It's like,
the fashion world is brutal.
It's so, it's like, oh my God, like there's so many two-faced people in the fashion industry. And that's what's refreshing about him, is that he just didn't.
Well, you couldn't put him in a box, and that's kind of the beauty of it. And like, there's this quote that I found that I think it's a good segue into talking about Voss, which is one of the epic shows that my work isn't about being shocking. It's about putting yourself in danger. It's like he wasn't out for shock factor. He was literally like creating these, well, at least with his shows. And like
he was testing his own boundaries. He was
testing.
It was nothing to do with about being a provocateur. Like Lee did not want to be a provocateur. Exactly that quote was, he was the one pushing the boundaries, pushing the boundaries out. I mean, I remember this show. So
tell us about it. Yes, describe it.
Obviously I love the, sort of the mirrored, it was like an insane asylum, and we were all the sort of, the people within the asylum, but the perspective of the audience being behind the mirror, so we can't see the audience. And there was an energy, sort of a very frantic and borderline sort of crazy energy about that, which he created, and it was, you really realize you're a part of something very special, because it was not a normal fashion show at all. It was a performance art piece. And I remember We'll see later on, I guess, images that
Mhm.
are later on. I saw them earlier with the sort of neck piece that I had on. I think they were in a few earlier images that were part of
Yeah, that's the
the
next.
show.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the one of my sort of finale pieces. And
I consider you the star of this. You and Aaron O'Connor are the stars of this show.
Aaron, Kate, Jade Parfit for sure, because Jade has
Jade with
and again the Hitchcock factor there too was very omnipresent.
There you are.
That I remember, because when I did the fitting in that look, it's such a wild story. I can't wait to kind of delve into it. So you see the neck piece, right? And it was genuinely like kind of close to the eyes, like close to my neck. And it was I really needed decent shoes to walk in this look, because it was very difficult to walk in. And you have to remember, the girls walking out before me, there was like, he asked people to kind of like, hit themselves and act sort of act out of their minds. So there was like pieces of dress, there was shells, there was glass on the floor. And at the
your look was made out of, sorry to interrupt, but your look was made out of a Japanese screen that he got it cleaned for in Paris, and he deconstructed it. And then also 50 polished black oyster shells for your skirts. And then the Sean Lean piece with titanium pearls. It is incredible. And
it's beautiful. But so they switched the shoes at the last minute, because there was another model whose shoes didn't fit. So they gave me the classic McQueen, like no heel. So the shoe, like those classic shoes that you have that don't have a heel. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to walk in these shoes with this skirt, with this like impaling object around my neck? And I was like, okay, the world.
Dangerous.
And walked around the runway, did my thing. But as I was walking back, like just before the screen going backstage, there was a cord, like an electrical cord on the floor. And I couldn't see it because I couldn't put my head down. I tripped and fell with that thing and cut my neck, cut my face, all these sort of things. And I remember Lee came rushing over and he was like, oh my God, the room went silent, and we kind of burst out laughing because I had little nicks all over my neck. And he was like, you can't walk out there again without me. So he sort of took me by my arm and we walked out together, arm in arm. But we were laughing because it was like, there's Jade's beautiful outfit there. God, so magnificent.
It was amazing. It was so sweet. It's like he took care of you.
And he gave me a different pair of shoes too at that point. But it was magnificent. But then most importantly, the scene in the middle with the the naked woman with the butterfly and it was like almost like
Michelle O'Lee. She's an erotica writer.
It was like very Francis Bacon.
Is it Joel Peter? Yeah, he was
Joel Peter Witkin.
Joel Peter Witkin
mixed with Francis Bacon for sure.
Yes,
and there was this. I mean, you'd never seen anything like that in fashion before. Never seen any sort of moment like that. And it was thrilling to be a part of it. But again, I just remember the sweet moments of walking, being backstage. I remember Kate Moss, was complaining about because they had to wrap our heads in these things, and she was like, oh, it doesn't make me look good. And we were all kind of laughing. Like we all looked like we'd had like facelifts or something like that. And we were there was so much
shock therapy. It's like, post-shock therapy.
There was always so much camaraderie backstage with his shows, and so much sort of, when I think about it, we were all such babies. We were all, and especially, Lee's relationship to Kate, he was always like, they really, truly like loved each other on a deep, deep level. I mean, and that's what I loved about him. Like he really, he loved the rough diamonds. He did.
Yeah. Well, he very famously not memorialized her. She's still alive, but he put her in that hologram at one of his shows, like the giant hologram. And like, that's one of those moments.
She was going through a hard time. He showed up for the people he show up for. And
that's really amazing.
Maybe when everyone else is closing the door, he was opening the door. And that's, again, like I said, I don't know how he would survive in this world that we live in without potentially, if he was here, he'd probably put his foot in his mouth and get canceled to a certain degree. But, but I also find, I found him so refreshing and so real. Like I said, there was something so beautiful about his genuine spirit that I miss, because again, we live in such a sort of polished fashion world.
Yeah. And but you guys were true
And everybody
collaborators. Yeah.
everyone has the mouth talking head, and Lee just did not do that.
Mm-hmm. But okay, so talk to me about like, the whole idea of model and designer collaborating. Like the next thing we're going to talk about, the next show is Deliverance. And
Yes.
this show, I know you say it in the Nick Knight thing, Sarah Barton is the designer who, after Lee passed,
Mhm.
he was her assistant and carried on until recently, the house.
Yeah.
But she told you that he had you in mind for this show the whole
Yeah.
time. And that to me is like, this is a symbiotic relationship that is really, really special between designers. Do you have that with anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that with a few designers over the years, like Jeremy Scott from Moschino, or when
Mhm.
Stefano Pilati was at Saint Laurent, and Tom Ford as well. Tom and I have always had,
Yeah.
a long-standing relationship, but I absolutely had a deep relationship with Alexander McQueen, with Lee, because he was a deep person, and he really, again, like I mentioned with Kate Moss, he had the models that he loved and adored, and was inspired by. And almost like you mentioned, actress, like being an actress, to the
Yes.
designers, we are like characters in their movie, right? And
Yeah.
it's like this, you are the character in this movie. And with Deliverance particularly, it was just such a special moment. That was like a show of again, another just magical show. And I remember the
This is your first look.
famed British choreographer Michael Clark choreographed the entire show, and it was with a lot of dancers and a handful of models. And the mood was, that film They Shoot Horses, Don't They?
Yes,
It
this
was
is a Sidney Pollack film from 1969. This is based on Dance Man.
It was based on that. And when I went to the rehearsal, did my fitting, went to the rehearsal, and it was just one rehearsal where Michael Clark was like, okay, I need you to act like you've been dancing for like over 24 hours straight, and you're exhausted, and you can't stand up anymore, and you're just completely beside yourself. And perfect for me, because I've got 2 left feet anyway. So I was like, oh great.
Oh, it doesn't look like it.
I don't have to dance. I get to kind of flop around, and that I got into the, again, I love this. This is what I love. I don't like walking down a runway one foot in front of the other.
I need to know about this dress though, because it is like, I hope you got to keep it, because it is
that was actually
awesome.
It's a real, that I wish I could keep that dress, but I also understand why I don't have that dress, because it's a very important part of his archive, that dress. And it's also falling apart.
This is my favorite.
I love that. The Stephen Klein shoot, actually.
Yeah,
that we did.
It's beautiful.
But he, that dress is a very important part of McQueen's archive that I wore during the Met Gala after for Savage Beauty, actually. And
it's so beautiful on you. I mean, it just like is stunning.
That moment itself, that show was hands down my favorite fashion show, because it wasn't a fashion show. It was like a piece of theater that he created, and
this
everything
is so special what I'm about to show.
Just, all the models falling over, sort of very much characters, like you can see there in the Alexander McQueen movie. And I get goosebumps even looking at this again. Like,
it's amazing. I've watched it like 20 times and I've never get tired of it.
how lucky I was to be a part of that, and for him to trust me to be such a role in such an incredible
and
show.
I think people need to understand that this was an important part of fashion history. Like his shows became happenings. It was like, these are moments where I posted a picture of you on my Instagram about this, and an editor I know who actually went to the show posted, she was like, oh my God, this show is transcendent. And so like this and Voss especially became, and number 13 where Shalom gets hit with that.
Incredible.
Amazing. But like, those are moments, like fashion people love to talk about moments. But this was a moment. You helped create some really, indelible moments in fashion.
It was a moment, and it's a moment I'm so grateful that I was a part of that. I mean, it was like, it's like when there's a few moments in my career that I think about and go, oh, like I was so lucky. And that really, it's like top 3 moments of my entire career, like up there, because it just, again, he let me do something that no other designer would, you
And
know.
you're the only listen, this is just, it was a role tailor-made for you specifically. And it's so funny because the model who ends it looks like you.
That's so funny.
It is funny. And it's like, for a while I was like, wait, that's not Karen. It looks a little bit like Karen. So it's like, you almost had
But I think,
doppelgangers
no, I
in
think,
here.
here's the thing, there was 2 of these things, and I think that's maybe why you're getting, there was one, because this was the end look, this one.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, there were 2 looks. Your first look
That
and the
was the
second,
end
but
look, and I had the first one. The first one, the more sparkly one, is when I'm polished and it's like we're just dancing. And then the second one is this one that closed the show. But then they did one of the few things Lee did. This was such an incredible show for him that they wanted to recreate it. I think American Express paid to recreate it in London and do a
oh,
whole.
really?
There was a redhead who wasn't me, because I think I was pregnant at the time or something. I couldn't come and do it. I was about to give birth, I think, and they recreated it for like
Oh,
an
it's
American.
interesting. I think she's in the show too, because we've got,
but it was
she's
a
in
red
the video.
in the sparkly.
Yeah. But to me, it was like, oh, there's, it's like an homage to Karen, like within the
It
show.
was sort of the characters of the show. So I did years ago in '97, actually, a shoot with Stephen Meisel based on They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And I think
Oh, you did?
movie to Italian Vogue. I did an Italian Vogue shoot with like Krista McMenemy, Amber Valletta,
Oh my God.
Naomi,
The
and
stars.
but it was all about that as well. It was black and white. It looked like film stills, and I think Lee really heavily influenced that era and that type of woman, which for me, I'm such a girl from the, I'm like a 40s, 50s sort of,
you look great
born in that time. But again, he was the master. Like, there was so many things about Lee. He could be so edgy and punk and raw, but then when you look at those dresses and the delicate fragility of he was everything. He was able to capture sort of femininity in its many forms.
Well, to me, he's like the dark and the light and the high and the low.
Yeah.
It's like his work embodies all those things, the structured and the loose.
Yep.
And it's such a tour de force on so many different levels.
Truly.
Yeah, really, really magnificent and beautiful work for you there. And I wanted to tell everybody, if you ever want an absolute delight, like get an issue of Vogue Italia with one of the 50 or 60 page spreads that Stephen Meisel shoots. Karen has been the star of many of them. I've got several of those editions from like the 2000s and 90s that they're like beautiful, beautiful storybooks. Like that is, Italian Vogue is like the biggest yay moment.
It was the era of Franca Sozzani and Stephen and Peter Lindbergh and Paolo and all those great, Bruce, all those people, just that it was a moment.
Yeah, totally. I want to talk about, as we all know, Alexander McQueen died of suicide in 2011. I think that was 2010. I wanted to talk, high level. I know you don't want to just talk about anything.
I just don't want to just.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to talk about, I think. And this is something like, I don't think that back when he was active and when potentially his problems were at their greatest and he really needed help, the culture wasn't there yet, to help him in the way that it could be.
I think a lot of designers experience burnout.
Yeah.
I think that's a very real thing. I think, it's a very hard business. Designers have to turn out collection after collection after collection, and each collection be as more vital, more better than the next. And it's a very difficult industry to thrive in. And I think there is, within the fashion industry, there's a lot of mental health struggles because it moves at rapid pace, and there's no moment for people to sort of recuperate, rest, relax. And Lee's mother had passed away. I think people who know the story that his mother had passed away, and he committed suicide the day of his mother's funeral. And his mother was such a pivotal woman for him. I think she really was the glue that held him together. And I think he was in a deep state of mourning and deep sadness. I mean, I don't want to speculate on if it was a rash decision or if it was a planned decision. I would lean more towards just myself, that maybe it was a rash decision in a moment of heightened grief. And he just was heartbroken and couldn't imagine being who he was without his mother around. But I also think that he had, like many fashion designers of that era, a lot of demons. And you know, and he also was surrounded by a lot of love as well. I mean, all the people in Lee's life are like, I know so many of them still today, and they're such good people. Katie England, his like one of his main collaborators, Sarah Burton, you know, and obviously Isabella had passed away equally by suicide. His dear friend Annabelle, years after, also passed away. Like there was a lot of like deep sadness around too for a lot of people. I think there was, and he gravitated to those. Like I said, you know, I had my own struggles back then too. You know, he gravitated towards people who were super heightened feeling people, emotional people, people who had their trauma and torture and their demons. And that's what made him so equally like vulnerable as well. And I truly,
part of his power too was the vulnerability, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, it was like he was, like I said, he that quote you put up about him being you know, testing his own limits is absolute truth. You know, and I think he was always, just maybe to even feel something was testing his limits and how far to go. And I genuinely think he was just deep in grief, and equally at that moment in time going through such a huge transition within his career, personal life. There was so many things going on that he just felt like he couldn't carry on. And you know, with suicide, there's no, it's so hard to go, what if ... I mean, him and I, like I said, were communicating weeks before he passed away, because he wanted me to be in another fashion show. And we were, you know, I got a message from his studio like, Lee wants you, you know, is trying to get a hold of you.
It's amazing.
You know, for a show. So I tend to believe that it was more of just a deep in grief situation, and he was sort of caught in the moment. But again,
that actually makes me really happy. Honestly, it makes me feel better.
But I also think he would, like, again, it's so hard to speculate on what a person's life or motives in life in general. But I think he also maybe somewhere deeply knew that he, like, where was the final road for Lee Alexander McQueen? You know, where was he going to creatively go? Could he continue in the industry the way he was working?
And sorry to interrupt, but to put that in perspective, like, you know, we talked to Dana Thomas last week, who wrote a book about McQueen and Galliano. And when Galliano was at the end of his work with Dior, he was producing 32 collections a year.
Yeah. The burnout is real, and addiction is real in fashion. And I don't want to speculate if Lee had an addiction or not, because again, I know things about Lee's personal life that I want to keep to myself, because it's just not that's been publicly talked about. But I will say that, you know, within the fashion industry itself, there was, you know, a lot of self-destruction in order to survive. You know, it's funny. I think a lot of people at certain points in time, the self-destruction was a self-protection mechanism until it becomes a faulty one. And then
anesthetizing too. It's like the pressure. It's like
it numbs
away, right?
Things. And I, again, don't want to speculate on what these specific demons are, or even the things that he was going through in his life, because it is deeply personal. But I would say that Lee understood that there was an ending to the persona Alexander McQueen, and he probably knew that to some degree that on an emotional level or a psychic, spiritual, mental level, that one day he would have to let go of that. You know,
it's funny. I've read 2 opposing things from him, like direct quotes, him talking about how the house could never continue without him, and also him hoping for the future of the house. So it just sort of points out the contradictions, once again, this dialectic of,
I think exactly. And again, it's so, when no one's around anymore, we can all speculate like they would have wanted this, that, or the other. I do think Sarah Burton being so close with him was the perfect person to hold that torch. And in the most sensitive and delicate of ways that Sarah did. And we'll see where it continues now with the new designer there.
Yeah,
and
Sean McGear.
And where that road leads to. But
have you talked to him? Do you have any connection to him?
I feel like I've met him once before, but I don't have much of a connection to him. But that's okay. I believe that he's really heavily referencing the McQueen archives. And look, it's really hard to step into those shoes.
Oh my God, I would not want to do it.
Can you imagine?
It would be a lot.
So I, again, have a lot of empathy, because even like from Lee's shoes to Sarah Burton's was difficult within itself. And then from Sarah Burton's now, it's again, everybody in fashion, like we can all be armchair critics, especially with social media. We all have an opinion behind a screen, behind a this and the other. And we're not the ones doing and creating and managing and trying to hold the expectations of the behemoth of what Alexander McQueen was and what he represented. That is really, really challenging, and I find
it's not fair to him to even try to speculate, honestly.
No, it's not at all. And I feel like that, Tom Ford had that with Yves Saint Laurent, and had to manage that. And every designer now has to manage that burden, of when there's a designer, they're taking over a house of a designer who is either, Jill Sanders, she's still alive, I believe.
Right. She went out and came back. She decided
Helmut Lang is an artist in the Hamptons. And, I love Helmut, but he's not been in the namesake of his brand. And a Mullermeister. Like, it's a very strange world. It's very hard sometimes for me, because I guess I'm old and I'm old school per se.
God.
So I remember walking in the designer show. The designer was the creator, not the creative director show. And not to say that that's good, bad, or whatever. It's just, it's a shift, It's a shift of mentality. But I know that, back onto Lee, like you can't be that brilliant without there being some deep, dark well you're pulling inspiration from, that is also the thing that is pulling you under as well. It's the duality of being, you think about great artists, you think about Van Gogh and his mental health struggles. I would say like McQueen equally was, like many a great artist, was compelled by these two opposing forces of light and dark that really pull him in either direction at any given time. And it's unfortunate that the darkness gripped him in one, maybe, unfortunately fatal evening. And, but at the same time, knowing him and loving him truly, and knowing the pain at that moment, he was probably in, it makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful place to stop, if that's okay. I would like to ask Megan, do we have some questions? We have a couple of questions for you, Karen.
Absolutely.
Yes, they're being walked over to me right now.
How to zoom. I still don't know how to zoom. I was like, let's put the blurry back.
I know. I'm kind of, okay. Oh, this is a good one. This is from Ashley. She says, do you own pieces of McQueen's clothing that you still wear? And if so, what is your favorite?
I do have McQueen clothing, and it's so funny because I was going through I put it all on my Instagram. I was going through a lot of my archive recently.
Oh my God, I missed that.
And I was going through boxes and bins and things. I found so many beautiful McQueen things, and I'll be honest with you, like some of them I don't wear because I'm so nervous to, but what my daughter has done. Anyone who has a teenage daughter, I love this, and I'm so happy that she wears a lot of the McQueen archive. So there was a beautiful dress that I have, Givenchy Couture, that I wore for the night, the Elton John fabulous vodka
the vodka party with Elton John. Yes,
it's probably still got vodka. It probably still smells like vodka at some point. Like, I have never got it dry cleaned. It is as pure as it was. And I did a residency few years back at Cafe Carlisle, and my daughter came, and
I came up for it. I loved
my
it.
daughter took the dress and wore the dress and had it on and was safety pinning it up. And I kept reflecting like, oh, he would have loved that. He would have absolutely loved that
Oh,
she was,
that's
you
so
know,
cool.
wearing that. And then I found, speaking of the that one collection,
Mhm.
what is it called? The 50s.
Oh, The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Yes,
The
he
Bond.
gave
Yeah.
me a blue mohair dress with a belt, and I
Oh.
found it in a bin the other day, in like a storage bin, and just again the memories flooding right back,
Mm. That
flooding
is
back.
part of the benefit of being friends with this, or being
I'll
in a
never get
fashion.
rid of stuff. Never. I will
Yeah.
never.
Oh God, no.
It's so funny because people who came to my house looking through my archive, and sort of vintage dealers were like, "Oh, we want that," and I'm like, "Hell no."
You're not getting this.
Fight me to, you know, and I'd win.
Oh my God, you were leading them down the garden path there, showing. Oh my goodness,
I
that's
was like,
amazing.
hell no.
Okay, we have a question from Aubrey. What recommendations do you have for those of us who are misunderstood?
Oh
Really
my
beautiful.
God. You know, misunderstood people are my favorite people. They really are. And I say that with absolute love, because I think it's, to view being misunderstood as a gift. That's how
Right.
I view it, because the most misunderstood people I've met are some of the most brilliant people. And it's sort of, other than fighting being misunderstood, I'd say lean into it a little bit more, because I think that there is, like I said, the most misunderstood artists I have ever been in contact with are some of the most profoundly beautiful people. And I think we can, and I've been felt chronically misunderstood in my life. And I would say my late 30s and early 40s have been really liberating, because I finally made peace with the fact that I'm not for everybody. And, I'm not, I'm not for everybody. And maybe my feeling misunderstood was sort of a badge of honor that I would wear for a long time. And then I realized, like, it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter if
Right.
you're I mean, and I don't say that to be dismissive at all. It's a beautiful thing to be misunderstood. And if you can find sort of I hope I'm helping in this degree, but what
No, this
helped
is
me
great.
personally was just to kind of go, yeah, I'm misunderstood, and
Right.
lucky
I'm
me.
different. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
different.
And I think that is like age and experience you do have,
Age for sure.
you know?
Age for sure is
Oh my
the thing
God.
that kind of brings wisdom. I mean, when I think about my 20s, God almighty, I was so tortured and so, like, just desperate for people to get me. And now I'm older. I'm like, I want to hide.
I
People
know,
not
it's like
getting me.
the things that used to be so important become a lot less important, and
Yeah.
the things that are really
But
important
yeah,
come
not to
into
be
focus.
dismissive. I want to say it's just truly, it's hard to be misunderstood, and it's hard to feel isolated from the world and feel like there's a gauze between yourself and the rest of the world. But
Mm.
lean into that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
your
love
super.
that. Yeah. Thank you so much, Karen. Like
Thank
it
you.
is always such a treat to talk to you.
You too, Libby.
And I
Always.
love it. I asked you yesterday, I was like, do you have anything you want to plug? And you're like, no.
No,
It's how nice.
nothing I need to plug. It's a really, like, I want to sit here and talk about Lee. That's the most important. It's not about me. This is about him, and I am so thrilled to be a part of this. And congrats to the Frist as well for putting on such an incredible exhibit. And I feel like the traction of this has been sort of far and wide. So many people have mentioned,
Oh,
the exhibition to me, and I think, again, it makes me really happy to live in a town that is bringing these things for our community and beyond to witness. And congrats to everybody.
You've been a great representative for Nashville in terms of like the globally
Speaking of being understood, I just, I'm like a pale English ginger who, moved to Nashville and was like a big fish out of water. And I was like, I've got to find my feet somewhere, and sort of be a member of society in some degree. But what a great exhibit, and just proud of everybody for putting this on. And thank you, Libby, for asking me to be a part of this.
Of course,
I'm thrilled to talk
Karen.
about the brilliant Alexander McQueen.
It's really wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
All right, everybody go see the show. You've got 2 more days, 2.5, I guess. You can go this afternoon. But it is a beautiful show, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the Frist again for letting me have these great conversations with my friend Karen. And here's to many more.
Here's to many more. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.